For this video, I thought we'd have a closer look at the adjustment brush within Adobe Camera Raw, and also some of the processes that I would carry out to a typical seed burr shop like this. So the image is selected, Control R into Adobe Camera Raw, and here we have it. No adjustments made at the present. We've got the workspace, the workflow options set to Pro Photo RGB 16 bits per channel. So those are set for when we send it to Photoshop. Now, as is typical with a bird like this, we have black and white plumage, which tends to show a blown out area of white plumage and deep dense pixels in the black plumage. So I would typically go to the highlight slider, drag the slider to the left, bringing back more detail into the white plumage. And for the dark plumage, I drag the shadow slider to the right. So highlights to the left, shadows to the right. We can see from the histogram that we haven't got any shadow clipping or highlight clipping. It's a fairly reduced tonal range. So I'll go to the white slider, press the Alt key whilst I'm doing this, and drag the white slider until we get something like that. Just a little bit of clipping in one of the color channels or so, something like that. And drag the black slider to the left. So we're just getting a little bit of black in some of the darker areas. And we can see we've got an immediate increase in tonal range. The exposure looks fairly accurate. So, and I really use the contrast. So we can go down to the clarity slider, maybe add a little bit of clarity there. I generally tend to back off the saturation and then just increase the vibrance of it like this. Okay. Down here we have a before and after cycle button here, and you can use that using the Q key, and you get 4 different arrangements of before and after. We're back to our processed image here. Now then, we still have a little bit of very bright area here, and I'd like to emphasize some of the area around the eye, brighten that up a little bit. So I'm going to use the adjustment brush to do this sort of thing. Let's get all these sliders back to the center. We can click on one of these buttons here. It centralizes everything apart from the slider in use, and you can just double click on the remainder and it's all centralized. Okay. So if I wish to decrease the brightness of the remaining white plumage, we can go to the exposure and the highlight slider, maybe drag these down a little bit. This will just give us an initial effect. And for this, I'm going to use what's called the auto mask. See this little button down here? Just the auto mask. Now, as I drag on the image, we've also got what's called the mask selected. And we can click and drag within the area I wish to have the effect applied. And it is looking at the pixels outside the area, and because it's a very abrupt change between the white plumage and the background sea area, the mask is doing a really good, the auto mask is doing a really good job of selecting just the white plumage to apply this effect to. And if I get rid of the mask, we can see the effect of the actual application of the exposure and the highlights. So that's too much. I'm going to drag that back. Okay, something like that. If I was to use the same sort of technique, but down towards an area that isn't quite as different, you know, like white plumage and a dark background, the masking effect isn't quite as good, and we can see we're starting to get a little bit of spillover into the sea area. So the auto mask feature is okay for certain instances, but it can produce some rather ugly artifacts even within the feathers itself. And if I get rid of the mask, we can get some pretty awful artifacts appearing. So we can get rid of that, and if I want, I can just erase that. So I'll go to the erase and we'll change the size of the brush, and we can do that by right clicking and just dragging in the screen like that, or we can change the size here. We can also change the size of the feather here, or press the shift key and then drag with the right mouse button to change the feather area. But because this is an erase, I'm just going to go over that area there. So we've retained what we selected there, and we've just erased the bit that we've done there. Okay, so I'll just get rid of the mask feature there, and I'll get rid of the auto mask selection there. Now what I'd like to do now is just brighten up the area around the eye. So I'm going to zoom in, Control Alt 0 to 100%, spacebar, move to the eye, and I'm going to create a new adjustment brush. If I didn't create a new one, then I would be adding to the adjustment created by that first pin there. Okay, so I'm going to create a new adjustment, and I want to increase the brightness of the eye area. So I'm going to select that little plus sign. It will neutralize or centralize every other slider and just give me an exposure boost of half a stop. I'll just click it once more to give me 1 stop, and we can just draw in the area that I'd like boosting. Right button, just make the cursor a bit smaller, and add it down like that. Okay, that's too much of course, so I'll just drag that exposure back a little bit. We could also maybe add a little bit of clarity or dehaze to that adjustment. Okay, so there we go, like that. So, and we can add as many different brush effects to the image as we wish. And of course, if we make an error, we can go to the erase and remove part or all of the brush that we've just created. If we don't like the brush we've just created, just select it and press delete. Control Z will undo what I've just done and bring it back again. Okay, so that is how I would normally process a black and white type of bird to compress the extreme tonal range, and then maybe add a little bit of local adjustment using an adjustment brush. We can then go back to the basic panel and maybe try and correct the color information. Let's go to the white balance tool and select an area that I think should be a neutral grey. Let's just select that. Select an area here. Okay, that looks a lot better. Now let's just go back to our little before and after toggle switch. So that's one way of looking at it. I'll press the Q button and you can see the before and the after in that view or that view, and return back to there. So hopefully that's just giving you a little bit more idea about the adjustment brush, the before and after buttons here, and how I would typically process an image like this.